Good evening. I would like to call to order the City Council meeting for the City of Wheatridge, Colorado for August 9, 2021. Would you please stand as you are able and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Hoppy.
Present.
Ms. Hutchinson.
Present.
Mr. Urban.
Present.
Ms. Hulteen.
Present.
Ms. Weaver.
Here.
Mr. Stites.
Present.
Ms. Dozeman.
Here.
Ms. Nosler-Beck.
Present.
Mr. Mayor, all 8 members of council are present. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Councilors, before you in your packet, you have the City Council minutes of July 26, 2021. If there are no corrections, we will let the minutes stand as presented. So ordered. Are there any changes or modifications to the agenda? None noted. We have no proclamations or ceremonies tonight. But we are going to start our meeting with the public's right to speak. Members of the public may speak on any matter not on the agenda for a maximum of 3 minutes under the public's right to speak. When your name is called, if you'd please come to the podium and adjust the microphone so that you can speak clearly. You may then speak on any item not on the agenda. Members who wish to speak at a public hearing, item, or a decision, resolution, or motion may speak on that item when we get to it, which is typically right after the staff report. And when you come to the podium, if you would please give us your first name and your last name, and spell your last name for the record, and give us your address, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. So we also have a special study session at the end of this regular meeting, and we will take comment on the regular study session. Actually, we will take comment on the special study session at the time of the regular meeting. It's a mouthful. Okay, so on our citizens' right to speak, our first speaker is Jerry DiTullio, followed by Julie DiTullio. And Mr. DiTullio has indicated that he would like to donate his time to Ms. DiTullio. So, Ms. DiTullio, please come forward, and you'll have 6 minutes.
All right, thank you. My name is Julie DiTullio. It's spelled D-I-T-U-L-L-I-O. And I'm here tonight on behalf of Jefferson Center for Mental Health. The address is 4851 Independence Street in Wheatridge. At the last council meeting, Councilmember Dozeman spoke about the Carnation Festival and also mentioned the Carnation Mile. And I'm here this evening to share a few more details about this event. As part of this year's Wheatridge Carnation Festival, we have our first ever Carnation Mile, which is a 1-mile run down 38th Avenue between Sheridan and Wadsworth. This will take place right before the festival parade comes down that morning. It's coming up this Saturday morning, and proceeds from the race will benefit Jefferson Center. This is a really great race to enter because the course is flat, it's straight, and you can run it really fast. We would encourage everyone to register before online registration closes at midnight this Thursday. Registration is $25 for adults and $15 for youth ages 6 to 18, and runners 5 and under are free. If you miss that deadline, you can still register on race morning, but the fee does go up to $35 for adults and $25 for youth. So if you're going to register, you really want to do it by that Thursday deadline. Additionally, anyone who registers the morning of the race will be put in the same wave regardless of your projected finish time, so that particular wave could get a little bit crowded. We also have a couple of family-friendly waves. We've got one for runners with dogs, and your dog must be on a leash. And we also have a wave for runners with strollers, so you can get the whole family involved. And then, of course, after the race, you're welcome to stick around and enjoy the parade. If you need more information or you would like to register, the website is carnationmile.com. So it's carnationmile, all one word, .com. Does anybody have any questions?
Ms. Hoppy?
Thanks for being here, Mr. Tullio. Can you tell me, do you have sponsorship opportunities? Like, as a city councilor, I could do a sponsorship for the mile?
We do, yes. And the sponsorship information is on the website, thecarnationmile.com, or you can talk to me about that as well, and we can arrange that.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tullio.
All righty, thank you.
I assume it's okay if you're also able to wave as the runners go by. All right. Thank you. I don't have anyone else signed up to speak under Citizens' Right to Speak, but if you're here and you'd like to speak, now is your opportunity. Please come forward. Or anybody on the Zoom format raising their hand. We're able to take it in a number of ways, but I don't see anyone. And let me go and see if do we have anyone signed up for the study session. We don't have anyone signed up to speak on our special study session. So if you would like to speak and are here on our study session, you may do that now. We will not take public comment at the time of that item. So, and I don't see anyone speaking, so we will continue on past our public's right to speak. And that will bring us to our first item. This is item number 1. Mr. Urban, would you please introduce this item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Against Bill number 13-2021, ordinance amending Chapter 22 of the Wheatridge Code of Laws concerning taxation, in connection therewith approving an agreement with the Colorado Department of Revenue for use of the department's sales and use tax software system.
Thank you. This will be a public hearing. It is an ordinance on second reading. It is not quasi-judicial. I'm going to open the public hearing. And Mr. Goff, do we have a staff presentation on this item?
We do. Thank you, Mayor. Allison Scheck, our Administrative Services Director, is here, and she's going to introduce our Finance Manager.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Allison Scheck, Admin Services Director. It's lovely to see you this evening, and we're very excited to be back before you to start advancing one of your council priorities tonight, which is improving our licensing and permitting processes. And I'd like to introduce you all to Mr. Mark Colvin. He is our Finance Manager here at the City of Wheatridge, and he has been doing all the heavy lifting with regards to this part of the priority. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark. Thank you.
Thanks, Hallie. When at a strategic planning retreat earlier this year, City Council identified process improvement among many as a priority for the next 2 years, the timing could not have been better for a process improvement the Finance Division of the Administrative Services Department had been eyeing for several years. Hello again, Honorable Mayor Starker and distinguished City Council. I am Mark Colvin, Finance Manager for the City of Wheatridge. I have the following presentation to go along with the current Bill 13-2021. Sales and Use Tax Software System. There we go. 2017, Sales and Use Tax Simplification Task Force created to make it easier for statewide businesses to file and pay taxes. In 2018, in South Dakota versus Wayfair, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of economic nexus versus physical presence. In 2019, the Colorado General Assembly passed Senate Bill 19-006, authorizing the Colorado Department of Revenue and the Governor's Office of Information Technology to collaborate on a one-stop shop solution. 2020, the Sales and Use Tax Software System, quote-unquote SUTS, went live in May 2020, and as of July 2021, 53 of 70 home rule cities were using SUTS. This year, 2021, at a strategic planning retreat in February, this council identified customer service and process improvement, among many things, of the city's licensing and permitting processes as a priority for the next 2 years. 2021, at the May 10 study session, Council provided consensus to move forward with SUTS. The purpose and benefits of SUTS. As a one-stop shop, SUTS facilitates and simplifies the filing and payment of tax returns for any jurisdiction in the state. SUTS will capture previously unreported or underreported sales tax revenue. Increase in licensed businesses as non-resident sellers use the portal. Taxability and exemption matrix for users to enhance the tax jurisdiction and tax computation accuracy. Payments collected by SUTS remitted by ACH to the city within 3 days. Admin support provided by SUTS staff. SUTS charges the city $1 per day for portal access. Necessary changes and impacts prompted by joining SUTS. The City Code of Laws, Chapter 22, Taxation. Updated language to align with state tax code and impact of economic nexus as a result of the Wayfair decision. For example, marketplace facilitators such as eBay, Amazon, Wayfair, and Etsy. Tangible personal property such as streaming services. And then another change that was required is the wording of engaged in business in the city. For example, online sales or mobile app deliveries. Another necessary change or impact prompted by this is that we will have to sign an agreement. The SUTS agreement is required by the Colorado Department of Revenue to participate. Cost for taxpayer, no additional costs are envisioned. Cost for the city, minimal staff time, and of course the $1 per day. We have a testimonial from my colleague at the City of Golden, Jeff Hansen. As one of the 53 home rule cities that have joined SUTS, Jeff Hansen, the Golden Finance Director, noted that we currently have about 110 businesses remitting to us using the SUTS system. Over 85 of them are remote sellers, and over 70 were not previously licensed or remitting to us prior to them using SUTS. That concludes my presentation. Council, Mayor Starker, are there any questions?
Before we go to questions from council, I'd like to open it up for questions from the public. Do you know if we have anyone signed up to speak on this item? I don't believe we do, and so in the meantime, I will ask if there's anyone here that hasn't signed up to speak. You may do so at this time and ask our clerk. If there's anyone in the Zoom format with their hand up to speak, we can do that, but we don't have anyone to speak, so we will complete our citizens' right to speak on this item and go to questions from council.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a question about the $1 per day. Is that a set fee at $1 per day, or is that a placeholder for an increase later on, or is that come to $365 per year, or why is it $1 a day?
It's actually capped, Councilman Urban, at $260 a year. So it's assuming that there's a 5-day business week times the number of weeks in a year. So it's capped at $260. The city deposits that amount of money into the account, and then they just chip away at it each day that you're using SUTS. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Yes, it does.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions? Ms. Holteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The quote from your colleague in Golden was pretty interesting. Do we have any sense within our own city what type, like how many businesses might be coming into the system in this program when it started?
Thank you, Councilmember Holteen. I really don't have a crystal ball to answer your question. We are hopeful that because Golden is west of us and Orvada is north of us, who is also on SUTS, and their data has increased, that ours would as well. We don't know. I don't know the names of the remote sellers that Jeff that's in his 110 or his other number, But I would imagine that we stand to gain as somewhere in that range as well, as we participate and sellers learn that Wheatridge is participating, then they will benefit from the one-stop shop and we'll start seeing a volume pick up.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing, and Mr. Urban, a motion is in order.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Colvin, for the presentation. I move to approve Council Bill number 13-2021, an ordinance amending Chapter 22 of the Wheatridge Code of Laws concerning taxation and the connection therewith, approving an agreement with the Colorado Department of Revenue for the use of the department's sales and use tax software system, and that it take effect 15 days after adoption.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Mr. Stites. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, will the clerk please poll the council?
Mr. Mayor, the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We will go to agenda item number 2. Ms. Hoppy, would you please introduce this item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is looking for a motion to accept the 2020 financial statements from Clifton Larson Allen. In section 10.15 of the municipal charter for the city of Wheatridge requires an independent audit be performed annually of all city accounts. In 2020, the city received more than $750,000 in federal funds for Wadsworth Boulevard, which also triggered a single audit of all federal funds. The CPA firm, Clifton Larson Allen, performed both the city and federal audits of the city's financial statements for the year end December 31st, 2020. Once again this year, the city received an unqualified opinion indicating that the city's financial statements are fairly and appropriately presented fairly and appropriately presented.
Thank you. As Ms. Hoppy indicated, this will be a motion of the council. Mr. Goff, do we have a staff presentation on this item?
We do, actually. I believe we have a representative from CLA here this evening, but I'll turn it over to Ali Sheck and Mark Colvin. I'd like to thank Mark Colvin for all of his work. If you haven't got your hard copy yet, you got the electronic version in your packet, but it takes a lot of time and effort to get these out every year, so kudos to Mark for that. Ali?
Thank you so much. Thank you, City Manager. Yes, please welcome our incredible auditor, John Paul Le Chevalier, with the coolest name here this evening in Wheatridge. And again, I'd just also like to reiterate my thanks to Mark for his work through what was an incredibly tough year last year and the first half of this year and getting this audit complete. So we'll turn it over to John Paul.
All right, thank you. So I'll spend just a couple of minutes covering what was included in the financials. I'll have that in an incredibly high level since it's about 65 pages, and I'll try and do that in about 5 minutes or so. We'll see. So if you turn to page 1, and I realize that that's not skipping very far into the document yet, but that has our independent auditors report. So this is our section of the financial statements. The rest of it is all city information until we get to the single audit, which relates to the federal funds and the required audit over that amount. So as was mentioned, there's an unmodified opinion, or it's informally referred to as a clean audit opinion. So what that means is that after doing all of our audit procedures, we believe that the amounts, the numbers that are included within these financial statements are free from material misstatement. So material meaning that it could be off $1, but it's not going to be off enough that it would impact your decision-making ability based on reviewing these financial statements. It also does outline our responsibilities, and again, that's reviewing these. We make sure that the amounts are free from material misstatement, and that's reasonable assurance, so it's not absolute. We didn't look at every single transaction that the city had during the year. But we did use statistical samples. We reviewed the processes, make sure that how the city is conducting its financial operations makes sense, and we would give any type of recommendations, either if they were significant in the report itself or through verbal discussions with the finance department. One thing to keep in mind is that our audit is not intentionally designed to detect fraud. It's a very common misconception. So if we did detect fraud, that would be something that would be reported to you immediately. You wouldn't be waiting till this presentation, but our audit procedures are designed to review the processes and the amounts that are included in here. Reviewing for fraud would be kind of a needle in a haystack situation, so that's not something that is intentionally looked at, but again, if it came up, we would report that to you immediately. So that's kind of our report within here. To keep in mind, this is the 2020 financial statement, so I realize that that's pretty dated at this point, but it does take a long time to get through all of the required processes to close the fiscal year and get everything reviewed and organized. With that, I guess just very briefly, in terms of the financial impact of COVID over 2020, you can see within the financial statements that it really didn't have too negative of an impact on the city from the financial perspective of the city. So looking at your kind of big picture including capital assets, you actually had a pretty strong strengthening of your city's financial position. When you look at it at the current resources, so kind of what can be spent financially over a one-year period, you had a pretty significant decrease, but that's relating to spending on capital assets, the Clear Creek Crossing, as well as the Wadsworth project. So both of those were significant capital expenditures that happened in 2020. So I will now jump to the very end of the document, so we'll hit just the beginning and the end with what's called the single audit, and that begins, if you take a look, page 58, it's the federal compliance-single audit section. We do have two other reports that are included in here relating to federal awards and our audit over those. The city did have two federal grants that were over the amount required to be tested. So we did look at both the highway planning and construction for the Wadsworth widening, as well as the coronavirus relief funds that came through from the CARES Act. So both of those were subject to testing, and even though it's a relatively new, both of those relatively new to the city did not have any compliance or internal control findings, which is really excellent news. It can be pretty challenging the first time or the second time going through this type of audit, and there's a lot of little nitpicky things that need to be done appropriately, and we're very pleased to report that the city has met all of those compliance objectives that we're required to look at. So that kind of concludes looking at that. Again, there's a lot more information. We could spend a couple of hours going through, but trying to be respectful of everyone's time. We also had a letter that was included within the packet that outlines all of the required things that we're supposed to report to you as auditors. I will say, when I'm looking at other places, it's in this letter that I'll go to if I'm trying to find out, is this going to be a good client or not? Because you'll see all of the different errors or things that the auditors had problems with come through in this letter. And very happy to report that it's pretty boring letter. So most of the time, boring's not good. In this case, it's it's the highest compliment you can get to have a boring letter here. So not a whole lot to really report on that. One thing to note is that in the first section here on accounting policies, there weren't any changes this year, and that's, COVID had a lot of terrible things that came with it. One of the silver linings in the accounting profession is that they delayed a lot of these accounting standards that were required to change. And so that is something that we're working with the finance department of the city on some of the other implementation of those changes that are coming in the next couple of years. Most specifically on leases is going to have one of the biggest impacts to the finance department. So that's something that we're aware of and working with, and that'll be coming down now in 2 years. It was delayed. So 2 years from now, that'll be something that we'll be looking at. Any questions or comments?
Before we go to questions from council, I'd like to open it up to the public to speak on this item number 2. I don't have anyone signed up to speak on this item, but if you are in the hall and have not signed, you may also come to the podium and speak if there's anyone, or anyone on the Zoom format. I'll go to my clerk.
Mr. Mayor, no one has raised their hand to speak.
Okay, I don't see anyone here wishing to speak, so we'll go to questions from council. Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Within the city's letter, item 35M, it states, we have disclosed to you our interpretation of compliance requirements that may have varying interpretations. So I guess my question is, depending on the varying interpretations, what kind of risk does that show, or are there specific compliance requirements that we're interpreting that may have risk?
Sure, so that's the other letter attached to this, which is, we refer to it as a representation letter, which an audit, a financial statement audit is really, as I kind of said, it's not about detecting fraud.
Sure.
It's really more of a cooperative kind of endeavor with the finance department of the city in reviewing everything. And so that's something indicating, that letter indicates from the city that they've provided us everything we've asked for, that they take responsibility for the financial statements, that they understand everything that went into the financial statements, and they agree with that. So that's what that letter is intended for. And so with compliance requirements, that would be if there's, for example, with the CARES Act, if there was a judgment on allowability of a certain expenditure that we reviewed with them, they're saying that that's their interpretation of the allowability of that would be that it is allowable. So they're, again, taking responsibility for what's included in there. Does that answer your question?
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
Additional questions at this time? I don't see any, so thank you very much for your report. Very well done. And to the staff, thank you for a clean audit. Very, very well done. We appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Hoppy, a motion is in order on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to accept the 2020 financial statements from Clifton Larson Allen.
Second.
We have a motion and a second from Ms. Dozman. And is there discussion on the motion? Ms. Hulteen.
I just want to recognize and acknowledge staff for accomplishing boring. That's worthwhile, and we hope we continue to get boring on this.
Okay. Any additional discussion on the motion? Seeing none, will the clerk please poll the council?
Mr. Mayor, the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We will move to agenda item number 3. Ms. Dozman, would you please introduce this item?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Resolution number 39-2021, resolution accepting title to real property within the city of Wheatridge. At issue, the city has received a commissioner's deed from Jefferson County conveying property within the city boundaries adjacent to Sims Street. The city attorney and staff recommend approval of this resolution accepting title.
Thank you. This will be a resolution of the council. Mr. Goff, do we have a staff presentation on this?
We do. Our city attorney, Mr. Dahl, will give you a quick update on this, or briefing.
Mr. Dahl, welcome.
Thank you very much. The issue indicated that this is property that Jefferson County holds, and they hold a 1-foot strip and a 24-foot strip adjacent to the 1-foot strip on Sims Street, and they hold that under 2 1955 deeds for those properties. Now, typically, when a city incorporates, as the city did, it just acquires title to all county roads within the city, and that title transfers automatically upon incorporation. But the deeds don't specifically identify this property as for right-of-way purposes. We think that was the purpose, but without complicating things too much, the title ended up, or remained in the county. And so the county has owned these little strips of land adjacent to Sims Street in the city ever since the city was incorporated. If there were to be a request to vacate those properties from the adjacent property owner, the vacation request would have to go to the county. The county's not sure it holds it for right-of-way purposes. More complex than it probably needs to be for 2 small strips of property, but in working with the county attorney's office, we came to the conclusion in Public Works that the easiest thing was to get the county to transfer this property to the city for right-of-way purposes. The city can then determine what to do with the property. It will hold it for right-of-way purposes. It can allow adjacent property owners temporary use as it does for other rights-of-way, or it could vacate in whole or in part. That's a decision for another day, but certainly before the city would have power to do any of that, it needs to be entitled to the property, and that is what this resolution does. The county commissioners have already approved the resolution, so the action of the council tonight is merely to accept the property. When you have a seller, you need the buyer to actually, or the grantee, to say yes. Otherwise, you could transfer property the grantee wouldn't want to have. So their consent is required, and that is your consent. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dahl. Before we go to questions from council, I will open this up to questions from the public. I have no one signed up to speak on this, but if you are here tonight and would like to speak on agenda item number 3, now is your opportunity. And we will see if there's anyone with their hand up in the Zoom format.
No, Mr. Mayor.
No one there, and I don't see anyone wishing to speak, so we will open this up to questions from council. Okay, I don't see any questions from council, or, excuse me, Ms. Nosterbeck.
Thanks. Mr. Dahl, has the county had any issues with neighboring, properties or residents with this property up to this point?
Fair question. The dialogue really has been pretty exclusively between the city and adjacent property owners. And when they request, gee, what can we do about this? The city has to say, well, we don't really own this, go to the county. The county points out that it's a strip of land wholly within the city, and they would prefer the city make the decisions about it. So yes, on and off over the years, there has been interest by one adjacent property owner in either using the property or questioning where the right-of-way for Sim Street would go. But the city's not been able to productively answer those questions because it simply wasn't entitled to the property. I do expect that this right-of-way would be helpful for Sim Street if it were ever to be built through and widened for whatever reason. So again, decision for another day, but in order to enable either that decision or interactions with the adjacent property owners to make the conversations that frankly have been a little frustrating for both parties in the past, it's sort of, well, don't talk to us, talk to them, and county sends people back to the city. So if we move title into the city, it means that dialogue, to the extent it's desired, can take place.
It just removes an extra step, an extra hoop to get through.
Sorry?
It removes an extra hoop to get through.
Yes, it absolutely
Move
does. And those hoops have been impenetrable, at least from the perspective of all three parties up till now.
Okay, thank you.
Are there additional questions from council? Seeing none, Ms. Dozman, may we have a motion on this item?
I move to approve resolution number 39-2021, a resolution accepting title to real property within the city of Wheatridge.
Second.
There was a motion and a second by Mr. Stites. Is there discussion on the motion? Seeing none, will the clerk please poll the council?
Mr. Mayor, the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We will move to agenda item number 4. Mr. Stites, would you introduce this item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Resolution 40-2021, a resolution authorizing the appropriate city officials to execute an intergovernmental agreement by and between the County of Jefferson, State of Colorado, and the City of Wheatridge, Colorado, regarding the administration of their respective duties concerning the conduct of the coordinated election to be held on November 2nd, 2021. At issue, the City of Wheatridge will participate in a coordinated election on November 2nd, 2021. The attached resolution and intergovernmental agreement must be executed and forwarded to Jefferson County by Tuesday, August 24th. The documents refer to administration of their respective duties concerning the conduct of the coordinated election. The duties of the county clerk include, but are not limited to, ballot preparation, voter lists, staff selection, and training, providing election supplies, counting the ballots, and certification of results. The duties of the City of Wheatridge include, but are not limited to, call and notice and ballot preparation. The city clerk shall act as the City of Wheatridge's election officer and designated election official. He shall act as the primary liaison between the City of Wheatridge and the contact officer for the county clerk and recorder.
Thank you. This will be a resolution of the council. Mr. Goff, do we have a staff presentation on this item?
Only if our honorable city clerk has anything else to add.
This is a pro forma exercise we go through every 2 years There's nothing new this year. There's nothing changed about it.
Thank you. I'd like to open this up for any comments from the public. I have no one signed up to speak on this item, but if you have not signed up and would like to speak, you may do so now. We will ask the clerk if there's anyone in the Zoom format with their hand up to speak.
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, we will close our public's right to speak and go to questions from council. No questions from council. Mr. Stites, may I have a motion on this item?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I move to approve Resolution 40-2021, a resolution authorizing the intergovernmental agreement with the County of Jefferson regarding the administration of the respective duties concerning the conduct of the coordinated election to be held on November 2nd, 2021.
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Ms. Hoppy. Is there a discussion on the motion? Seeing none, will the clerk please poll the council?
The motion passes unanimously, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. That concludes our regular agenda items on tonight's meeting. We will now go to City Manager's Matters. Mr. Goff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple quick things before our special study session. Our Lutheran Master Plan is about at its halfway point. We're getting a lot of public feedback and comments, so that's awesome. We have our last public survey online seeking feedback on 3 different concepts. The online feedback we're seeking mimics what we received from the in-person meeting held here last week. So if you weren't able to make the last week's meeting, you still have an opportunity to provide online feedback. That survey is open through the end of tomorrow, Tuesday, August 10th. So we encourage everyone to take it and share it at whatsupwheatridge.com. And then also kind of a cool, exciting project that we had in our community over the last last week, I guess. I'm probably going to butcher this either. I can never say this. It's catalytic. There you go. Catalytic converters. We've all heard about that, right? There's unfortunately a huge theft of catalytic converters. People can turn those in and get money for the metal value. Our police department, led by Sergeants Weimer and Detective Culp, put together a program, and we actually used our Midas building that the city now owns on 38th and Wadsworth to allow owners of vehicles to bring their vehicle in, and where a sticker with a serial number was assigned and applied with a chemical solvent on the catalytic converter. So if it's stolen, the thief cannot take it anywhere. It won't be accepted. But hopefully, if somebody's trying to steal it, they'll see that on there, and hopefully they won't steal it in the first place. So we had over 500, I believe, vehicles come through in a 2-day period, and a lot of volunteers also in our police department, in our community, and that helped out with this. So I want to thank everybody for that, and it was well promoted. You've probably seen it on the news or in the paper here and there. So it was a great program. Thanks to our police department, Sarah Spalding and Amber, who helped put that together. Thank you.
Thank you. City Attorney's Matters, Mr. Dahl.
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Elected Officials Matters and start with our clerk, Mr. Kirkpatrick.
As of this evening, we have had a total of 5 individuals do what we call poll petitions to run for office either as mayor or member of council. 4 of those petitions were pulled by the incumbents eligible for re-election. The mayor, Ms. Weaver, I forgot Leah Dozeman's name for a second. Sorry about that. Leah Dozeman and Janice Hoppy. Mr. Ohm, Scott Ohm, has pulled a petition to collect signatures to run for council in District 2. Starting the middle of this week, we will update daily a list of everything that has been filed and all the persons who have pulled petitions on the city's election website. And anyone who is interested in knowing more about who's running or in what district or whatever will be able to see that online. That's all I have, Mr.
Thank you very much, Clerk Kirkpatrick. And we have our treasurer, Mr. Miller, with us. Mr. Miller, any comments tonight? Okay, thank you so much. We will go now to our counselors. Start with Ms. Nosler-Beck.
Nothing this evening except for see you in District 4 at Anderson Park for the Carnation Festival.
Thank you. Ms. Hutchinson.
Nothing tonight except see you at the parade.
Thank you. Ms. Dozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to thank the community and the city of Wheatridge for hosting the Carnation Festival this year. Last year was a really tough year, and we were sad not to be able to have it, so we're really hoping to see all of our friends and neighbors come out this weekend. The event kicks off Friday evening at 4 p.m. There's going to be live music, fireworks both Friday and Saturday, the Wheatridge Grange pancake breakfast at 7 a.m. on Saturday morning, the Carnation Mile right before the parade, and the parade kicks off at 9:30. And then, you know, of course, there's going to be beer and carnival rides, so we hope everybody comes out and has a good time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I look forward to seeing everybody out at the festivities this week, and just looking at the awards for first, second, and third place for the Carnation Mile is 75, 50, and 25 respectively. But then it says the Masters division is anybody over 40, and that just kind of stings a little bit. So anyway, I'll see you out there.
Maybe they'll have grandmasters. Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like everyone else, I am cagey with excitement for the Carnation Festival. I'm already exhausted thinking about making it to Sunday morning. So I have a couple of other things. First, I really want to thank the clerk's office for all of his efforts around the local election this year. The communication and the materials are really helpful, and just want to thank you and your office for that great effort. I also just want to make a comment that I attended the Lutheran community meeting last week, and it was really exciting to look at 3 different options that have really been informed by our community's vision of what can happen on that site. And we're incredibly fortunate that SCL wanted to partner with the city to do this planning process. We could have very easily been in a situation where this process could have been a master developer who isn't a longtime, member of our community and who really understands who we are. So it was neat to see that this is just a continuation of Wheatridge becoming more Wheatridge. But what I really want to make a comment about is I was just disheartened by some of the uncivic and uncivil behavior that I witnessed and overheard. And I just think it's really important that we treat our staff and our consultants with respect. Decisions that council has made, fair game, come talk to us and let us know if the direction that we've asked staff to take is not in alignment with what you think, the direction of the city should be. But, our staff works hard, and we hire the best consultants to do this work on behalf of our city. And I just ask that our community treat our staff and our consultants with respect. I think I'm embarrassed sometimes when I see how staff and consultants are treated. And I'm just asking our city to, it's okay to have differing opinions. It's okay to not be happy with the way things are going. But please direct your comments to the right people. And make us proud to be a city, and just realize sometimes things aren't going to be the way you like them to be. But we're still human, and we should treat each other that way. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Weaver.
Thank you, Councilor Hulteen and Mr. Mayor. I am so excited for the Carnation Festival. I'm excited for the parade. And if you don't feel like running, I think you should join Councilor Urban by baking a pie for the pie contest. That judging's going to happen mid-afternoon, after the chili cook-off, and before the Kiss Lookalike Band, and after the awards. So it's such an exciting Saturday. I hope everybody comes out, and if you don't feel like coming out, come and enter a pie, and you only have to be there for 45 minutes. And you could go home with some great prizes. So Looking
Very good.
forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. How do I become a judge in the pie eating contest? Yes, I would. Talk to me about that. Nothing tonight, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Other than can't wait for the Carnation Festival. And, as long as you're out shopping and doing all that in Wheatridge, make sure you can buy it in Wheatridge and nowhere else. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mayor Pro Tem Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to ask, I'm going to sponsor the Carnation Mile through some of my outreach funds, and I don't know if any of the other counselors want to join me in that, but if you do, just let me know, and I'll get that organized after. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That almost concludes our meeting. I want to thank you all for being here. We have a birthday. Miss Weaver is another year older today, so we will wish you a happy birthday. I had an opportunity to meet with other Jefferson County, or actually metro mayors throughout the metropolitan area with our regional and governmental health officials this morning. Unfortunately, the numbers on the pandemic and are going in the wrong way. And so I would like to ask all of our citizens to take care of one another. Please maintain your social distancing, wear a mask, wash your hands, and get vaccinated. So we will have our study session starting in about 5 minutes after we conclude, and that will adjourn our meeting right now. Thank you. for the City Council for the City of Wheatridge, Colorado for August 9th, 2021. We have, let's see, two items. We have number one, outdoor recreation equipment on private property. Item number two is tenant notice in the zoning code. We have taken public comment that was available at the beginning of the meeting, so we're ready to begin. With agenda item number one. Mr. Goff, you have a staff presentation on this item.
We do. On both of these items, Ms. Michalak, our planning manager, is here this evening, and I believe we have Ken Johnstone, our community development director, on Zoom. And I'll turn it over to Lauren.
Thank you. Yes, good evening. So I'm here tonight as a follow-up to our June 7th discussion of outdoor recreational equipment. And you'll recall that in June, we talked about how the zoning code doesn't really talk very explicitly about recreational equipment. And so we had shared the policy that we'd been using up till now to interpret the code. And it was a good discussion, and you had a really clear consensus. My notes said that what we wanted to do was go ahead and amend the zoning code to regulate recreational equipment on residential properties. We wanted to distinguish between temporary and permanent features, utilize the accessory structure standards as a guideline, and then write the code to make sure we can amortize equipment that doesn't apply. So the memo that we provided to you tonight presents a draft ordinance that we think achieves those goals. So we've added a definition, and then we've added several standards, and I'll summarize those just quickly here. So anything 120 square feet or less would not be subject to the zoning code, and that's a threshold that we already utilize in the building code. So for example, sheds under 120 square feet don't need a permit, playhouses similar. Anything that's temporary would not be subject to the zoning code, and then this new set of rules that we've created is for recreational equipment larger than 120 square feet and more or less permanent, just a set of simple standards. So maximum size proposed to be 400 square feet, maximum height proposed to be 12 feet, minimum side and rear setbacks proposed to be 5 feet, and then the front setback would comply with the underlying zoning. To inform those standards, we looked at a few examples, the few examples that we have at other communities, and then also just the sizes of different types of sort of typical equipment. We included those for your reference as well in the memo. If you do want to proceed with a code amendment, next steps would be a hearing at the Planning Commission and a first and second reading at Council. And so for tonight, we'd just like to confirm that this approach meets your policy intent, and then specifically, we'd welcome your feedback on the compliance deadlines that are sort of left blank in that draft ordinance that's in the memo. That's all I have for introductory comments.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Ms. Michalak? Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Lauren. I do have a couple questions. First of all, on the 400 square feet, how is that measured? So like I'm thinking about one of the images showed like a play structure that was kind of like T-shaped. And so if you measured the rectangle that it's within, is that the 400 square feet, or is it the actual 400 square feet of the ground that the piece of equipment occupies?
Yeah, that's a good question. We were on Costco and Playworks websites looking at dimensional standards of a variety of play sets, and the 400 would be like the conservative rectangle approach. So it would definitely accommodate the majority of play sets, but we didn't do like the straight line along the tightest possible footprint.
Okay. And then my second question, I guess before kicking off just the amortization schedule conversation itself, how would something like that be enforced? So should we, fill in the blanks on those dates to come up with our compliance for existing? What would that look like for enforcement? Would it be because people report it to the city? I mean, how do we go about enforcing that? Because it's people's backyards and.
Right, so most of those kinds of enforcement issues come up on a complaint basis where we or code enforcement, the most typical fact pattern is a neighbor calls and then gives code enforcement officer permission to go into their backyard to observe the issue, and then they make contact with the party that sort of has the issue. So it's sort of case by case, but on a complaint basis.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep.
Additional questions? Ms. Weaver?
Thank you for the presentation. I just had a couple questions similar to Counselor Hulteen's. I'm looking at the last right-hand square, and it's an obstacle course, and it says that it wouldn't be permitted in a residential yard because it's too high.
Yep.
So how high is that thing, and how prevalent is this? Is this something you can go by, or is that something that's been built?
Having done quite a lot of Googling on ninja obstacle courses that people have, you can buy a kit to build your own. There are lots of people who make it up themselves. I don't know the height of this, but it does exceed. There was a fence in one of the other images of this person's tutorial, so we determined that it was probably higher than the 12 feet that we'd proposed, and probably bigger than the 400 square feet also, frankly. There are ninja obstacle kits that we found that are 400, that would comply.
I guess
Yeah.
that was my question, is
Yeah.
that if it weren't so tall, this would comply. If it were no more than 400 square feet, am I
Right.
saying that correctly?
Right.
Okay. And so my second question also has to do with sort of how we think about, I notice you're not using the word retroactive, and so if we create these rules and then how much time I'm just curious, how much time do you think we should be giving people when we know that there are some structures out there that are currently being complained about?
Frankly, in my time, we haven't had a lot of code provisions that we've tried to amortize. So we've talked about, do we want to amortize signs, and we haven't gone that direction. We pulled this language from a provision in the lighting code that's about 15 years old, where we tried to amortize. And I honestly don't remember what that duration of time was. Usually it's a period of at least several months. I don't know if there's a best practice, if you're familiar. Okay. We're thinking about short-term rentals recently. We gave, I think, maybe 3 months for folks to license, right? May 1st to August 1st. So we have options. I know you know the approach our code enforcement officers try to take is to give people sort of warning and opportunity to comply.
Sure.
So we're not trying to be, make life too difficult.
Sure.
So if I was to make a recommendation, it'd certainly be at least a few months.
Right. And if I had something that was anchored into the ground, right, under this definition, a permanent structure, so essentially I might get a notice and then be given a certain amount of time to remedy that per the code that we're talking about here. Is that correct?
Yes.
So would they have to allow code enforcement onto the property to see the actual thing? Or, I guess in this case, it would have to be then permitted if it were a permanent structure that had footers, correct?
I'm sorry.
Does that make sense? So if it's a structure if it is a permanent structure that requires some sort of footer into the ground, that's what I'm understanding permanent to be. And so if they were to get then a citation for what they currently have with an amount of time to mitigate that, they would also have to get a permit for the reevaluation of that? Is that kind of how it would go?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Mhm.
And thank you for all your research on this.
Sure. Yeah.
Ms. Hoppy?
Lauren, did you have a?
I was just going to say, I kept looking over at Mr. Dahl, who has more experience with amortization clauses. Do you want to?
One consideration that is usually applied to amortization provisions is to relate the amount of time that you allow people, or you signal to people that they have to bring their properties into compliance, to the amount of investment that is being required to be removed or changed. And so, if you've got something that truly is portable, then number one, it's likely going to be allowed within certain dimensional requirements here versus things that are more permanent. And having said that, things like this, I agree. I would make it several months. While it's not a really good analogy, as you might recall, the massage regulation that the city put in place required people to change their business models, required people to look at their leasing arrangements, and the city, I think, properly took into account kind of what are the circumstances here and what's reasonable. And my inclination would be to recommend, if there's a question, a longer period of time, because the real goal here is eventually you achieve compliance that then is permanent and forever. So the amount of time that you allow for people to come into compliance is less important than making it happen. So if you can give them enough time so that they're coming in compliance without a lot of enforcement activity, that's actually a win for the city. I'm thinking here somewhere between 3 and 6 months, depending upon the kind of permanence of the structures. Certainly no more than 6 months, I wouldn't think, but that amount of time I think would be about right, and we can come back with recommendations when the ordinance comes to you on first reading.
Thank you. Ms. Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Lauren, thanks for your work on this, and I think that you did a great job with the direction that you were given. And the draft code amendments, I agree with those all up to the retroactive date. So I support moving this forward to planning, but I don't support adding a retroactive date to it, and here's why. In my 21 and a half years of being a parent, I think I've probably had 15 different backyard configurations, and it changes. It changes with your kids when they grow, as they grow. It changes with your kids as they change. It changes with the number of kids you get into your household. So, so I don't think making it retroactive is necessary. I would think that if I were a neighbor and I saw a new structure going up, or somebody took down an old structure and started to put up a new structure, then at that point, because they're changing it, then the new structure would have to be in compliance. So, so that's how I feel about this topic.
Additional discussion. Ms. Weaver?
I think the issue that I have with this is we have an adult structure that is over 600 square feet. And so I'm going to ask a couple more questions. So the 400 square feet, is that flat surface or is that total surface?
It's footprint.
That's footprint, okay. And what about, I know we have noise ordinance for pools or for anything outside past certain, skate parks have a certain noise to them, and while I realize we're not dealing with a particular issue here, there is a particular issue that exists in a neighborhood in Wheatridge, and noise is part of that. And I respect what you said about how configurations change. This is a structure that adults are on many nights, and I'm also concerned about the noise, and it is a particular noise, and I don't know if there's any way to address it. And if you've spent any time sort of in skate parks, you know the specific kind of noise that it is. And maybe I don't know, I'd love to hear thoughts from other counselors on that part of this issue as well. I think that the size coming down would mitigate that, but I also don't know, since I don't use those types of structures. So thoughts would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional discussion? Ms. Dozman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think, would we put a date on the retroactive? Like it would be within a certain time frame, correct? Like within the last 3 months, 6 months, or would it just be retroactively implemented altogether?
Well, you have a couple of choices. A retroactive is probably an inarticulate, or at least not a very useful way to describe it. What you would be saying, at least paragraph 6 says, to the extent equipment is existing on a given date, and that could be, the date of adoption of the ordinance, or it could be sooner, then you've got until this amount of time to come into compliance. So you've really got two periods of time. How far earlier than the date of the ordinance do you define the class that's now needs to be changed, and then how much time do you give them to change? What I think I'm hearing from Councilmember Hoppy is, no, this should begin on the effective date of the ordinance, and then maybe you give time for them to come into compliance, but it doesn't reach back. So we'll probably need direction from you before going to Planning Commission with this on at least that point. And when you're ready, we can structure some motions to give direction to staff so that they can take a package to Planning Commission.
Thank you. So I also had one other concern. When I'm seeing this visibly, that first picture in the upper right-hand corner, that seems like a relatively small structure to me. So it's really surprising that would be 9.5 feet tall, 150 square feet, and would have to adhere to the zoning standards and the minimum setbacks. Because, from what I've seen of families' configurations, is they tend to be closer to the fence, just to allow for more space. And so, would this structure be 5 feet setback or 10?
We proposed that it would just be a 5-foot side and rear setback.
Okay, all right, that I'm a little bit more comfortable with, but just seeing like how small some of these structures are that would have to adhere to the zoning code kind of makes me a little hesitant.
Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To the point about the 9.5 foot tall play structure, there's one of those in my neighborhood located in the front yard, and the slide is directed towards the street. So, safety first, or somewhere close to that. So that, it's frustrating because we're talking about this in context of what we would sort of look at as, like Councilmember Hoppy suggested, sort of the interests of children and sort of that they ebb and flow, and there's different personal equipment that we, utilize over time. But I think the context in which we're discussing this is for those adult-sized structures that are not being utilized by children, like a trampoline is on Saturdays or something like that. It's a much more aggressive use of the property in that regard. So I think that those that are responsible and able to do it right have no problems with the neighbors. It's those that have abused that. I guess one of my questions is relating to the property itself that we're discussing. Have we had any communication with the property owner at all, or has there been any discussions with them?
With the owner of the half pipe?
Yeah.
I did, I had correspondence with them last year, and then I did send him an email in the last week or two to just bring to his attention that his structure was the point of discussion. I did not hear back from him, but I let him know how to participate in the discussion.
And then as far as the process of going about identifying these structures, is it a complaint-based process that is utilized for that? Or are we doing that proactively, or how is that addressed?
I would envision that it is a complaint-based. Nobody wants to be the fun police, right?
No.
Staff or council. And so my impression from our conversation last time was that, there's a gut check moment when too big is too big. And because we can't see into a lot of these yards, and some of these things that may trigger this are in fact innocuous, I imagine it would just be on a complaint basis. The other thing we can also do is make sure that it's something that could be subject to a variance, because we're not conceiving of all possible reasonable types of equipment. So we have some flexibility there too.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Hulteen?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple more questions. I know that the definition of temporary or permanent is kind of subjected to, I believe, Ken's discretion. Is that correct, that you would be looking at that? Because I feel like from the examples, it made me realize that there is kind of a gray zone between what's permanent and what's considered temporary. Like just looking at the trampoline that's pictured here, I have helped put those together. It might be easier to build the ninja wall. So I'm just sort of curious, what type of criteria would be considered when trying to thread that needle between temporary and permanent to see if something complies in this. And then I do have 2 other questions.
So I'll speak for Ken's determination, but we did put 4 considerations in. So size, portability, deconstructibility, and the presence of utilities in terms of determining when something's permanent or not. There is also a process in the code where if somebody doesn't like that determination, they can appeal it to the Board of Adjustment. They hear appeals from any code interpretation. It's infrequent, but it does happen on occasion.
Okay. And then my second question is regarding pools. So there are temporary above-ground pools, and I'm wondering how those would be considered under this. And then also, if we do look, and I do actually support the amortization schedule in part because what's brought this forward is an existing structure. And, but would pools have to come into, like in-ground pools have to come into compliance? Or can we actually consider variances for something like an in-ground pool?
We have processed variances for above-ground hot tubs before. So what we would codify with regard to pools has been the sort of long-standing way that we've been applying the code. I'm not finding it right at the tip of my fingers, but there is language about the number of gallons, and I think 24 inches or less is not subject to building permit and nor to zoning code is how we've been interpreting it. But in terms of the amortization, we could probably either include or exclude those because those are definitely a separate category from the recreational equipment.
Okay, and then what about in-ground pools in terms of if we go with an amortization on this?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
In-ground?
Like in-ground pools, would they have to come into compliance if they're not?
You could write it so that they didn't. I mean, historically, we have applied setbacks to pools separately. So the way that we've done, let me see, the size of the pool or hot tub shall dictate whether it's subject to major or minor setback requirements. So any new pool in the last 20 years is probably going to meet the setbacks because we've already been applying them. And then anything exceeding the minor accessory size, any pool exceeding the minor accessory size is subject to the major accessory structure setback. So that language, that paragraph 1 on page 2, we've been using that policy guide language for probably a couple of decades. So I'd be surprised if we find an in-ground pool that doesn't meet that already.
Okay. Well, those were my 2 questions. I guess as I just mentioned briefly, I do support the amortization schedule on this, in part because this is in front of us for a specific issue. And I believe, when we had the first discussion that led to what I think is a pretty thoughtfully constructed policy recommendation here, we were really looking at how do we find the balance between the quality of life in our backyards. And we want, nobody wants to be the fun police, but we also want people to feel like they can enjoy their properties. And it's not entirely quiet in Wheatridge, but so I'm, given that what we're talking about is enforcement because there's a problem, it's probably not going to impact too many people who already have play structures in their backyard, but if they have a problematic one that already exists, I think it's fair for us to be able to address that. So, and I would also support a variance process so that if we have something that isn't in compliance, but isn't necessarily creating a quality of life, that there's a fair process for that to be evaluated. So, and with that, I guess for amortization schedule, as a former real estate agent, I keep thinking we're talking about taking out a mortgage on someone's backyard, but I think 3 months for not as substantial of a structure and 6 months for something more substantial. And then that kind of would go along with the variance schedule also. So that's what I would support.
Thank you. Additional discussion, Ms. Hobby?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just, it seems very difficult for me to be able to do, to make new rules because of a single property. And we've only had one complaint on one property, and so it's very hard for me to say, and now everybody has to come into compliance with this. All y'all, somebody messed up, now all y'all got to do it. So for me, I won't support a retroactive come into compliance piece of this. I do support doing this and moving forward, because I also understand that sometimes we just don't know what we don't know. And so, I get that we need to try to find something moving forward that's good, but I don't want to necessarily make it retroactive.
Additional discussion on this item? Mr. Stites?
Just to make it simple, I'll go with Ms. Holteen on this one, and I agree that the 3 to 6 months based on the permanence and the expense and all that. I'll second what Ms. Holteen went with.
Ms. Weaver?
Can I ask for a consensus
You may.
on what Ms. Holteen?
Unless we have any further discussion,
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
If I could help to clarify on this timeframe issue that has been raised both by Councilmember Hoppe and Councilmember Dozman. Honestly, if you have an earlier date, that isn't really much different than saying all structures that are within the scope of this ordinance, commencing on the day the ordinance becomes effective, have to come into compliance by a certain date. So I would say, for ease of administration and simplicity, that you don't really need a reach back date. You just need to say what your going forward date is, because I assume you don't want to create just a one category of structures that have been in place for a couple months, and those are the only ones we're going to, these rules will continue and should, be observed going forward. That was certainly the case with massage. We didn't look back. We said, as of this date, here are the new rules. Here's how long you have to comply with them. And I must say that for enforcement purposes, that will be much easier. And I would recommend, I had a short conversation with Lauren here to confirm that there wasn't a specific need to create this kind of odd category that you got to figure out who's in it and how do you figure that out, and it's very difficult. So I would recommend, before you do a consensus, that for number 6, it's just a 3 or 6 month date, which I'm here happening, going forward from the effective date of the ordinance. And whatever structures are in place that are encompassed within the scope of the ordinance will be subject to it and have those timeframes available.
Thank you, Mr. Dahl. Ms. Weaver?
Thank you, Mr. Dahl. So I am asking for consensus around the ordinance as staff has written it, with an amortization going forward from a start date of 3 or 6 months, such as Councilor Hulteen mentioned. Do you want a separate, and with a variance process? I'm asking for that consensus.
Okay. Do we have consensus on that? Looks like we do. Does that, Lauren, does that answer kind of where we need to be in order to get a ordinance drafted?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you. We'll prepare this for one of the upcoming planning commission meetings and then have it calendared for council as well.
Okay. Thank you very much. We will go to our agenda item number 2. This is a tenant notice in the zoning code. Mr. Goff.
Thank you. I don't know if you're going to take this too, Lauren?
Yes.
Lauren Mikulak will take this, and again, Ken Johnstone's on Zoom if you have any questions for Ken.
Okay.
Thanks. So our next topic, tenant notice, it's kind of a new chapter in a familiar topic. Community engagement has certainly been a theme in the last couple of years. Last year, we added Wheatridge Speaks, and we expanded letter and sign notice for public hearings. This year, you added community engagement and education to your strategic plan, and we talked about that in May when Allison Scheck presented that work plan, and that's what this what this study session topic stems from is from our discussion in May. So to start, what we did was identify the places in the zoning code where Chapter 26 distinguishes between owners and tenants. And those distinctions really fall into three different buckets: development rights, objection rights, and what we're calling sort of right to information. And our focus tonight is really on that third bucket, so who gets informed of certain development-related actions. And we were surprised to find so many. There's 6 different code sections and actions that have associated letter notice. And historically, in Wheatridge and elsewhere, most letter notice has sort of traditionally gone to the property owner, and that's definitely something that's starting to change. You can see that shift visualized in the table that we put there in pages 2 and 3 as we look at other communities. The shaded boxes in that table represents a letter notice that goes to tenants as well as to owners. About half of communities include tenants and half omit them. That's a little bit up from when we last did a survey of communities about a year and a half ago. We think that shift is partly related to the availability of data and mapping technology, which just makes it a lot easier to access that information than it was maybe 10 or 20 years ago. And certainly part of that shift reflects our current era where there's a higher value maybe on information and transparency than there had been, in past decades. If you were to expand letter notice to tenants, we think it's really well aligned with the goals that are outlined in the city's comprehensive plan and certainly with your strategic plan. And from a practical standpoint, there are some changes that we could make, but certainly they're doable. We've outlined those in the memo as well. So first, we'd need to periodically purchase address data. The public record, which I included a screenshot of, comes from the county assessor, and it lists the mailing address of the owner and it lists the physical address of the property, but public record from the assessor doesn't include all of the unit addresses or suite addresses for commercial properties. So it's nominal. We'd budget about $2,000 annually to make that periodic data purchase. And then certainly if we added tenant mailers, the volume and cost of mailings will go up. It's not going to be uniform across the city. It'll be a smaller increase in some areas and a more substantial increase where there's a concentration of multi-tenant buildings. We can absorb that increase in mailing costs in a couple of ways. We charge a flat fee right now to land use applicants. We can either increase that flat fee or modify our fee based on the volume of letters that would have to be mailed. The second attachment in the memo just gives you a quick visual sense of the distribution of multi-tenant buildings that we have, residential buildings that we have in the city. So multi-unit structures make up about 1/3 of our housing stock in Wheatridge, and we know that about half of all housing units are renter occupied. That data and visualization is not quite as easy to do from a commercial standpoint, but when we talk about tenant notice, we are talking about residential and commercial. The data set that we'd be purchasing has it all lumped together, so we can't buy just residential or just commercial. It'd be for both. So the purpose of tonight is to look at those 6 code sections related to letter notice, and we tried to create sort of a stratified low, medium, high option. And that's on that last page of the memo. So the first thing we could do is improve the methodology to get notice to tenants for neighborhood meetings. That's something that we're already trying to do, but we know we could do better with purchase data. The second option is to add tenants to the mailings for public hearings, something we could do through a code amendment, knowing that public hearing notification has been a priority of yours in the last year or so. And lastly, we could add tenants to the other 4 letter notice provisions that we've identified in the zoning code that typically relate to sort of a pending land use case. That's really all I had by way of introduction, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go to questions. Ms. Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I first would like to say thank you to Councilmember Stites for joining me in the late 2019 to kind of add notification on and get it on the radar and start the conversation, because then at the strategic planning retreat, it became a priority. And so I'm really happy to see where we're at with this. I appreciate all the work that that has been put into it. And what I really liked about in the memo is that the American Planning Association periodically publishes policy guides representing the organization's official position on critical planning issues. And the APA's 2019 Planning for Equality Policy Guide acknowledges that neighborhood power structures have been dominated by single-family homeowners who are often predominantly white and above medium income. People who rent, who are renters, who are not property owners, are absolutely also our community. And I really like the way that, that this was presented in the memo. And when it goes to policy discussion and next steps, I absolutely think we should spend the money to get all of the addresses. I was kind of blown away that only the owner of the apartment complex would get the notice and not the people who rent there, because the owner of the complex most likely doesn't live there, but the people who do are the ones who are spending their expendable income in our community. They're the ones who are volunteering on the trash cleanup days. Like, they're the ones who are here and like a part of our community. So yes, I do think we should do that. And the desire to expand, is there a desire to expand letter notice for public hearings on land use applications to include tenants? I say absolutely. Right now we have letter notice for public hearings to owners only. I think that should be owners and tenants. And then is there a desire to expand other letter notice provisions? And there were 4 different sections that would change, and they all basically read letter notice for special use to adjacent owners only, and I think it should say adjacent owners and tenants. And I think this is, we always talk about how do we get people who are not property owners involved in the conversation and what we're doing in our community, and this is absolutely the important step to take to get them involved in the conversation. So thank you very much for your work on this, Lauren.
Thank you. Additional discussion? Ms. Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I just want to say I fall within this category. I'm a tenant, even though I'm a lifelong resident of Wheatridge. I'm renting my childhood home from my parents who own a second home in Wheatridge. Eventually, I want to be able to afford to buy my childhood home from my parents or another property in Wheatridge. And I know that I am not in the minority, and many of my generation and my son's school explicitly, we have several community members that are long-term renters in Wheatridge. They're wonderful tenants. They either rent one property, or if they get priced out, they try to find another property in Wheatridge because they absolutely love our schools. We've worked really hard to have Wheatridge be attractive to young families who want to purchase and raise their young children in this community. And we have people that can only afford to rent, but are involved in the community and want to be involved and want to have a say. So I really appreciate this endeavor and support it wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional discussion? I don't see much more discussion. Ms. Hoppy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to ask for consensus to move forward with supporting procedural change and the process of data and to obtain comprehensive tenant addresses, to also change the language where it says notices, letter notice for blank, public hearings, interpretation of zoning district, special use variance, and for concept plan to say not only owners, but also owners and tenants. Some of those say adjacent owners and some of those just say owners, and I realize that in our code we have different 600 feet notification for this type and adjacent owners for this type. I would like it to say owners and tenants. And I'd like to ask for consensus to move that forward.
All those in favor? Looks like we have consensus on that. And Lauren, does that provide you all the information you need in order to move this one forward?
Yes, thank you. So we'll start working on that procedural change, and we'll move a code amendment forward to make those
Mr. Mayor,
changes as well.
I had one.
Mr. Urban?
Sorry about that. I was wondering if there was a sort of a universal way to have somebody be put on a list to receive all public notice mailings, or a mechanism to say, I want to receive all of them that come out from the city.
Is there a mechanism?
Well, I don't see a mechanism currently, so I don't know if that's a possibility to develop that, to say, put me on the everything list.
Not for land use type cases, notices, but you can register online for agendas and meeting notices and different things like that, but not for land use, correct?
Right, and that's something. And for land use, if you could receive all land use notification.
as Ken likes to say, we sort of live and breathe by the code, no more, no less, which is why we update the data that we have every quarter in terms of mailing addresses, and we utilize that, and then we use those 300, well, it used to be 300, now 600-foot radiuses, sort of with fidelity. So we don't have, we wouldn't have an additional mailing list beyond what the codified radius is, but yeah, to Patrick's point, we try to make the information on public hearings available, and that's also why we've talked about where we have the newspaper and sign notice as well, so to allow other people to become
That makes sense.
aware of a case that's going through. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that completes item number 2. 3, staff reports. Mr. Goff.
Nothing else this evening. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. And we're at elected officials' reports. Any elected officials have a report from the study session? Okay, we have concluded our business for the study session. Hope to see everybody at the Carnation Festival and the parade. We're looking forward to it. So thank you for joining us. We will adjourn this meeting.